Welcome to Season 3 of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Join me, Brad, each week as my guests and I share incredible, inspiring, and powerful sobriety stories. We are here to show sobriety is possible, one story at a time. Let's go! In this episode of the podcast, we have Jared, who shares his journey from a seamlessly normal childhood in rural Arkansas to struggling with addiction and eventually finding sobriety. Jared shares about the impact of his addiction on his role as a father. Jared recounts his experiences in rehab, the importance of honesty and community in recovery, and how his career in music, including a stint on The Voice, helped shape his path. After having 12 years clean, Jared went back out for another drink, but was able to exit the train much sooner this time. He emphasizes the significance of finding purpose, helping others, and the continuous effort required to maintain sobriety. And this is Jared's story on the Sober Motivation Podcast. It was vital in keeping me accountable. It doesn't interrupt my life. It only enhances my life. People in my program swore by it. These are just a few quotes from SoberLink users. SoberLink is not just any breathalyzer. It's the breathalyzer designed specifically for those in recovery from alcohol addiction. How it works is simple. You'll test at the same time every day. A built-in camera will take a photo during your test so it knows it's you testing. Tamper sensors will flag any attempts to cheat. And instant, easy-to-read results are sent directly to your loved ones because it's not just about proving you're sober. It's about sharing your success, establishing patterns of trust, and dispelling doubts with hard evidence. SoberLink, proof of sobriety at your fingertips. Visit soberlink.com/recover to sign up and receive $50 off your device. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode. I heard the other day that I think yesterday, June 20th, was the first official day of summer. What a beautiful thing. I love nothing more in the summers than for the weekend, for Friday, to take the kids out for ice cream. I honestly never thought my life would be that simple, as for the longest time, I just looked for the party every single Friday night. And it's just beautiful when you get sober and things slow down a little bit in some ways. And I'm able to just be there and present for the things that I find important. And for all of us, we're going to have certain things in our life that we find important. Before we jump into this episode, though, I want to give a huge shout out to my buddy Marty, an avid listener of the podcast. We were able to connect over on the Sober Buddy meeting that we had the other night on Wednesday. And Marty was 2 days away from 1 year, 365 days. And I've been talking with Marty on and off since the beginning. So proud of you, buddy. Keep it going. Also, I want to just give a huge shout out and a thank you to everybody for your continuous support here on the podcast. It's truly incredible. We've got some more. I know I say it all the time, but we've got some more amazing episodes coming up. And I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me for this long. Maybe some of you have been here since the beginning at almost 160 episodes. I thought for sure you guys would have been bored of me by now. But if you've been around since the beginning or you're a new listener, welcome. It's so awesome to have you, and I'm so grateful for all these people who trust me to share their story. And I really get a lot of feedback that it's helping people, and that's what it's all about. And if you're struggling, we got you too. Just keep at it. Don't give up. That's the only way this thing doesn't work out, is if you quit trying. So if you're struggling, heading into these summer months, reminiscing about how things used to be, ground yourself with community, find some people that you can share with. And if you want to, join us over at Sober Buddy. The meeting we had Wednesday was incredible. We just had another meeting Friday. I host 3 meetings in Sober Buddy each week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'm telling you, after I leave these meetings, I'm pumped up. I'm ready to go, and I know for sure that I'm going to get another day sober. Connecting with other people, listening to them, and relating to their stories makes all the difference. We don't have to do this alone. So I'm rooting for you guys. Now let's get to this episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Today we've got Jared with us. Jared, how are you?
Doing good, brother. How you doing?
I'm well, man. Thank you so much for being willing to jump on here and share your story with all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So what was it like for you growing up?
Growing up, I tell people this all the time because I think people expect you to have some sort of deep bad thing that happened for you to start drinking and using the way you did. And I didn't. Life was pretty good. I'm the one that screwed it up. My parents were great. I did watch my oldest brother struggle with drugs from a very early age that I saw. So there were things that probably sculpted the way that I thought, but on a whole, my childhood was great. My father did go through a brief addiction period to pain pills after coming out of a pretty serious injury, the hospital. I observed that, and I remember as a child, I would ride around on my bicycle with cough drops and pretend like I was a drug dealer, which looking back on it is a pretty strange thing for a child to do. I remembered seeing one of my brothers do cocaine at a very young age as well, and that seemed to set with me. But the reality is my parents were very supportive, very loving. We lived in a small town in Arkansas. We grew watermelons and had a convenience store, and it was a pretty chill, rural life. And my oldest brother was the tough guy in school, the tattooed quarterback sort of figure, and I idolized him. And him and my middle brother turned me on to music at an early age. And it was like Johnny Cash, Bob Seger, AC/DC, stuff like that. And I think I started to glorify what those guys were doing and how they lived. And so I think I set up a fascination with alcohol and drugs long before I ever
Yeah.
started playing music around 16. And that was when I had my first drink. We were playing a deer camp party. They wanted a band for some sort of little celebration they were doing. And I remember getting ready for the stage, and I walked around back, and there was this old truck with a tailgate down and an ice chest on it. And I saw this little Jack Daniels down home punch in there, and I thought, well, that looks good. And so I tried it, and I loved it so much that I immediately started looking. I saw that number 7, and I immediately started looking around for where that number 7 was. And so I went straight from the first night that I drank, straight from a Jack Daniels down home punch to going, where's the Jack Daniels? And I stayed there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that. So you have two older brothers then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
2 older
Okay.
brothers, one 9 years and one 12 years older than me.
Oh, wow. Okay. And grew up in Arkansas. How did school look for you?
School was very small. Once again, I was a musician, so I was choir and band. Definitely, we lived out in the woods, so I didn't see people a whole lot. Definitely think that added to the issues of needing to be out and about and in a bar and that kind of thing. I was alone a lot growing up because my brothers were a lot older than me. My parents were very busy running their business, so it was just me and a dog in the woods for probably at least half of my childhood.
Yeah. So after that first drink, it's interesting because a lot of people share different stories. Some people, that first drink hits right, and other people, it's like it wasn't necessarily the one that got all of the wheels turning full throttle. But for you, you would say that kind of primed things moving forward for you.
Oh, absolutely. The first drink was amazing, and I immediately went for the hardest version of it that I could find. And that night, the cops showed up. I remember I was singing Tracy Lawrence's Time Marches On, and a flashlight hit me in the eyes. And it was a cop, and he said, son, how much have you been drinking? And I said the same thing all of us do, a couple. And he said, get your ass home, boy. And we left, and that was it. But I look back at that a lot now and think about how that set things in motion for me because I got away with it. It was something I wasn't supposed to be doing, and I got away with it. And I got home, and I was drunk and peed on the side of my dad's truck and just left a mess. And I should have gotten in a lot of trouble the next day. And my dad had a convenience store that was an hour away, and him and my mom decided to spend the night there because they had to be there early the next morning. And so no one came home. And so I walked out the next morning, first time getting drunk, to a truck with both the doors open and sound equipment hanging out of it and pee all over things and just a mess, and had been, faced with the cops that night before and no consequences. And that definitely set something in motion in me like, hey, that was a lot of fun and I got away with it. Let's try it again. You know?
Yeah. No, for sure. But yeah, it's like that first time. I mean, innocent, right? I mean, 16, getting into it your first time, right? The cops aren't, it's not going to be like the movies where they take you downtown kind of idea and it's going to be big trouble. But yeah, I think for some people, that aren't going to struggle with this down the road, that might have hit, right? That might have been like, okay, that's a little bit, that could be a little bit
Right.
much, right? But then there's guys like us, I'm assuming here, we're pushing everything to the limit. And if you give us an inch, we'll take a mile. So where
For
do you
sure.
go from there? I mean, how do things progress for you? And you're into the music, like you're in a band at this point?
Yeah. So we're doing choir and band at school, but then also I have a band on the side.
Mm.
From there, I moved to Branson and I started playing music at this little diner there. I had gotten married at that point, so I was 19 years old, married, and living a state away from my family. Wasn't drinking much, just still one of those like those occasions when things happened. And I did notice, that whenever I had the opportunity, I always took it too far. And but it stayed that way relatively for the next probably till I was 21. And maybe that was just because it was harder to get booze on a regular basis. I wasn't focused on drinking. I just couldn't control it when I started. And so when I was 21, we moved to Nashville, me and my wife. And that's really where it started. And oddly enough, I had started a Bible group at my church about the dangers of alcohol and drugs and living in a secular world. And while I was doing that Bible study, I went from, it was about 9 months. I went from being a casual drinker that occasionally drank too much to a daily drunk, essentially. And within probably 3 years of being here, I was in my first rehab. And just in about a 3 year span, I went from casually drinking to being drunk every day, doing cocaine at least 2 or 3 times a week, and putting away about 2 bottles of Jack per day.
Wow. Looking back, what would you put a finger on for like how it progressed like that? What was going on to get it to that level?
I think that one was I was very uncomfortable being myself around people. I'd, grown up in a small town, and like I said, half of my childhood was alone. And so I was uncomfortable being around people. Alcohol definitely opened things up and it let my guard down. I was able to let you in. I was able to talk to you about things. I was able to be myself. I felt cooler. And once I found cocaine, that was the perfect combination for me, alcohol and cocaine, because all of a sudden then I felt like a superhero. And you just felt invincible. I could say anything and do anything I wanted. During that time period, I signed my first publishing deal with Sony. And things definitely escalated at that point because they get you out of trouble. You could call them and be like, hey, I'm in jail, and someone would bail you out. Hey, I need 5 grand, and someone would come give it to you. You had lawyers at your disposal. They wanted to keep a clean image on you. And so you just had a lot of people that were there to defend you and take care of you. To be honest, the cops weren't as active on DUIs and that kind of stuff back then. And you're talking about 20 years ago, and they just weren't as active. Uber, wasn't a thing. So it was every single night driving drunk home, for basically 10 years. But yeah, I think it was just being uncomfortable with being me on a whole, and
Yeah.
I think for most of us, alcohol and drugs, if you can get that right balance, and you often do in the beginning, it makes you feel whole. It makes you feel complete. And I talk to kids in schools about drugs and alcohol addiction. And, when I was growing up, it was the DARE program where they were constantly telling you all these bad things that were going to happen. And for what I saw in my life, the bad things didn't happen in the beginning. The bad things were 10, 15 years down the road. It was all freaking great. The reason that I became an addict is because it was the perfect solution for a long time. It got me where I wanted to go. It made me feel the way I wanted to feel. It was so amazing. And I mean, you get the right combination of drugs and alcohol, and it's so amazing that you'll give up your family over it. So I don't know that there was people a lot of times look at, what tragedy happened in your life that made you this way. And I go back to like, dude, alcohol and drugs make you feel that good. It just felt good.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate with you too. I didn't have any, major tragedies growing up, but I think that in my life, there was like a crossroads. Like it felt like my life was coming this way and then it just crossed at that maybe perfect time. of when I got introduced to it. And I struggled with a lot of that stuff. Maybe you mentioned as well, like the insecurities and having a hard time meeting people and fitting in and dating girls and finding these communities to be a part of. And I found out early on, if I just drank alcohol, I could go to these parties and I could fit in, and it didn't really matter about the rest of my life. That's what I was
Absolutely.
worried about. And I was craving that connection with people, and alcohol just
Hmm.
provided it. And I'm with you too. I mean, the combination of alcohol and cocaine, like it was really weird. I had this like big secret cocaine addiction. None of my friends ever did or ever did it or ever understood it. They thought it was like the strangest thing, but nobody ever said like to stop it. But it was like this extra secret on top of what I was doing when we'd go out to the bar. I would be disappearing. But nope, when I think back to it, nobody ever really like they noticed, but nobody ever really thought that it would turn into maybe what it turned into, right? It was just like innocent fun on the weekends. But I guess I only showed people as much as I wanted to show them. But it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I grew up, I remember in grade 5, we did the DARE program, just say no to drugs, and I mean, I think that there was things about the DARE program, which, I mean, were great. At least they were doing something. But I
Yeah,
also
for
think
sure.
like, but I didn't pick up the thing about, hey, if this thing grabs you, how do you get out of it? It was all about preventative, which I think is great. And that's going to probably help a lot of people. But when I found myself stuck in those early years, well, I didn't have any experience on how the heck to get out of it. And I was just surrounding myself with more and more people who accepted that this was like my life and they didn't say anything. Not that it was their responsibility to, but it may have been, helpful in a sense. So you go to Nashville. I mean, was moving to Nashville for music? That was the reason?
Yeah, for sure. It was 100% for Nashville for music. And it was the best move that I could have made. And at the same time, opened up doors that were dangerous. But
Yeah. And you got married at 19 too. Wow. And then you moved there with your wife and a couple years into this thing, the music's going well. I mean, are you producing music, writing music? Like how is your deal with Sony?
I was writing music for Sony. And so it was a deal with Bob DePero, with Love Monkey, and Sony Tree. And so you're just getting paid to write songs every day. And it was awesome because, you went downtown, met up with some guys, wrote songs, and around 3 or 4 o'clock, went to the bar. Or if you weren't writing anything good, you went to the bar at 11 o'clock, like, and you'd start drinking and you'd stay there until the party started, and that was super intriguing, that whole day drinking thing. And so by the time people showed up, you were already full party mode. And I think that's also where cocaine came into pictures because, once you've been drinking since, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then everybody starts showing up at the bar around, 6, 7, 8 in there, you're already like gone, And I remember another artist friend of mine, one night he was about to go home, and Nashville was very different back in those days, and you got away with things that are mind numbing now. I remember he just pulled out some cocaine and he just put it right there on the bar, and hit this. And I was like, "Dude, you gonna do that and then drive home?" And he was like, "This is how I drive home." And I was like, "Huh?" And and then he was like, "Try this and tell me this isn't awesome." And I did it, and it was like all of a sudden you were alive again. You went from, being like, I'm about to pass out to let's go. And first night I did cocaine, I was at this Demumbrium section of Nashville. It's kind of a cross between, it's a bar section that's connected to all the record labels and that kind of stuff. And the next thing I knew, I was downtown at a club called Stage. I got in a fight, got arrested, went to jail. And that was my first time doing cocaine. And I remember coming to the next day after I was out of jail and went home and went to bed. I came to, and my first thought was, I've got to find out where to get that. Like, it wasn't like, holy crap, I just went to jail, I shouldn't do that again. It was like, I got to go find cocaine. Like, and I mean, obviously, those sort of things, they're undeniable, and we deny them and act like, we don't have a problem or whatever. But it's like, come on, who does that? Who goes to jail immediately when you try something and wake up the next day and go, let's do that again? Like,
Yeah. I'm with you too. Actually, my first time doing cocaine was the same kind of experience, right? It was the guy I was with. I was working at a restaurant at the time, and this was an older guy. So I got plugged into, some of these older guys that worked in the kitchen. That's what the deal was. We're leaving this college party, and he pulled out this dollar bill or whatever, unfolded it, bang, there's the stuff. And it's like, hey, we do some of this, we can drive home better. I mean, just thinking back and reminiscing, in my mind on those stories. I mean, it was complete madness, right? It was just that
Yeah.
insanity of things really starting to pick up. But like you mentioned too, man, that like we don't necessarily realize it at the time. It's just like forward and onward.
Yeah. I mean, you just brought up the rolled up dollar bill. Like, that's some of the weird stuff. And honestly, those are things that I still reminisce about every once in a while. Of like, it wasn't just the drug, it was the way that you did it. It was the dollar bill, it was the razor blade, it was the mirrors, it was the glass, it was sneaking off to a bathroom. It was just every way that I fell in love with the way that you did it. And for me in particular, I romanticized cocaine and Jack Daniels in particular. And that's something that people don't talk about as often. And I don't fully understand it, but like I, to a degree, just fell in love with the whole process of it.
Yeah, I hear you on that for sure. So you mentioned there too that you went to the rehab for the first time. I mean, how does that come about to your life? Did somebody mention something, or how do you end up there?
Yeah, the first time, I'm not totally sure how it came about. But the parts that I remember of it were, I was missing. I remember that I was missing for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then I had missed several shows. I remember sitting at a bar at one point in time, and my guitar player called me and going, "Hey, where are you at?" And I was like, "I'm at Tin Roof." And he was like, "We have a show in like 10 minutes." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to be there." And I just hung up and just went back to doing what I was doing. But I was gone for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then the next thing I remember was a friend picking me up from like an alley. And then I was at the doctor. And I remember your mind just goes in and out when you're really messed up. And I had a cocktail of pills and Coke and then just been drinking for days. And so I was just completely out of my mind.
Mm.
And I remember being in this doctor's office and seeing my brother there. And the doctor would come in and I'd talk to him and then he'd leave. And I'd talk to my brother and the doctor'd come in. I'd talk to him, then he'd leave. And then I'd talk to my brother. My brother's also a doctor. And then he was like, "Hang on." And he goes outside and talks to the doctor. And I remember him telling him, "Hey, you're not getting the full scope of what's going on with my brother." He's like, "I don't understand what's happening." He was like, "But he is crazy out of his mind until you walk in. And when you walk in, he's all of a sudden like straight laced, speaking straight. Everything about him seems totally fine." He was like, "So I want you to understand, like, this is all just a big game for him. He's pretending when he's in front of you." And I think back on that a lot because most of my friends didn't know how messed up I was, and it's really weird how we as alcoholic and addicts often have like this whole other person in us that understands when there's danger of you stopping me from doing what I want to do. And we become a whole nother person and we can just straighten up and be on point for a certain amount of time. But then as soon as the danger has left, then we're right back to being, psycho again. And I remember that. And then I remember being checked into this because I was broke. So I remember being checked into like a state facility psych ward and still I had taken enough that I still don't really remember anything, but I remember, I didn't have shoestrings on all of a sudden. And I remember the mirror was made of metal and was bolted to the wall. And I remember counting blue ducks that I thought were walking back and forth past my room. And obviously there were no blue ducks. And the only thing I can never think is like I had to have pulled that from like that Adam Sandler movie because quite frankly, I've never seen a blue duck before. I'm assuming that's what was going on in my head. But I was there for probably 2 or 3 days. And then I remember talking to this guy and I was starting to process at that point, like, I don't think I'm supposed to be wherever I am. Like, this isn't this. It seems like these people have some serious problems and I'm starting to come down. So I'm starting to see reality there. And I had a meeting with the head psychiatrist that day. And so I'm just sitting down with the doctors, and the doctor at the end of the table, I find out was the doctor that was credited for getting Johnny Cash clean. And none of this is really occurring to me. I'm not really understanding where I'm at. I'm not even noticing anything about myself. And then the doctor at the end of the table says, "Son, I'm looking over your paperwork here. I feel like that you may have lied to us about your alcohol consumption when you came in here."
Mm.
And I said, "What did I say?" And he said, "You said that you have about a 6 pack a day." And I remember being frantic, and I was like, "Nope, I have like 2 bottles of Jack every day." And he goes, "Well, that would explain your shaking." And I looked down and realized that they had tied me to this wheelchair because I was shaking uncontrollably. And he said, "We're going to check you in for long-term treatment here." And then, like I said, it was a state facility. They checked me in and started detoxing me. And at some point had contacted my brother and said, "Hey, we can only go so far as a state facility. You're going to need to get him into a real rehab because he's going to die." And he was very point blank, like, "This dude is not going to survive if you don't get him some serious help." And so we detoxed there, and they transferred me to Cumberland Heights on the outskirts of Nashville here. Music Cares picked up the bill. So I do a lot of service work with them these days. They picked up the bill to put me in rehab. And that was one of those first moments of realizing what the recovery community was like, because I remember thinking about it was a $28,000 bill that these people picked up, to send me to rehab. And I remember them telling me, "Hey, your life is worth something." And they sent over all these messages from different celebrities that had been to this rehab and stuff, people that they knew that I would look up to in the music industry. And they were awesome about trying to make sure that I understood, hey, there's a lot of people in your industry that can side with what you're going through, and they still made it through. They've still had great careers, and they wanted to make sure I understood everything and make me feel at ease. And so went to Cumberland and was there for 30 days, came out and still couldn't put together more than 30 days together for the next 4 years, what I tried to do. And every once in a while I'd get 30 days, occasionally I'd get 60 days, but on the whole, I was just in and out of the program.
Yeah. And how old about are you when you went to this center?
24.
24. Okay. Did you try a fellowship or anything after? Like after you discharge, they give you a plan to do some
Yeah.
stuff?
They told you to do the 90 and 90, and I did. I think that was the only saving grace for me with it, is that I remember someone telling me, "You don't have to quit. You just have to have the desire to quit. You have to be honest with yourself." And so I'd show up to meetings, and sometimes I'd show up to meetings and I was drunk, and I'd keep my mouth shut. And if anybody asked, I'd admit I'm drunk. And so that was the message I took, was like, if I'm honest with people, and I even had a sponsor through the whole thing, and I'd call my sponsor and be like, "Hey, I'm gonna go get drunk tonight." And he was like, "I think that's a horrible idea." I'm like, "You told me I had to tell you, so I'm doing it." And I was brutally honest about things, but definitely struggled with it for the next 4 years.
Yeah. What was your family's thoughts on it too after the rehab? Because I know like a lot of people too think you just go to the rehab and then, bing, bang, boom, somebody's done, right? And I don't know, that's definitely not always the story.
Yeah, I don't. My family didn't understand it. I mean, none of them really understood addiction or alcohol or anything else. So they were baffled and confused of, like, why I couldn't stop, just like most people, and yeah, no one really understood. And some people fought you on the idea of, like, "Oh, you're not actually an alcoholic because of this and because of that." And I think most of those people were probably just trying to make sure that no fingers got pointed at them for their issues or problems. But yeah, they didn't understand at all. And at that point, then I had 4 children by that time. And the oldest girl was 4 at the time. So for no, so I would have had 3 at that point. I didn't have the fourth one yet. I had 3 at that point. And so the oldest one was 4, and there was a 2-year-old, and there was a newborn. And the 4-year-old had a lot of questions about what was happening, why I was gone all the time, and how come I didn't come home at night. And she probably, out of all the things that people said, my daughter probably had the biggest effect on me, because it was just a child asking questions. She wasn't accusing you of anything. She just asked you questions, and it made you think.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I was wondering that. So yeah, 3 kids, my goodness. And in this sort of thing is just taking the front seat, maybe in a sense, to everything.
Mhm.
Drinking.
For sure. I tell this story when I'm in schools, and it's still probably the most powerful moment of my life. I would come home in the morning, typically between, 4 and 7 a.m., still drunk. My wife and I obviously didn't have a very good relationship at that point. And she typically had been up all night, trying to figure out where I was. So she was asleep. And I'd get home and watch the kids. And I was sitting on the couch with my daughter watching cartoons, eating Cheerios. And she looks up at me and she said, "Daddy, you're the greatest daddy ever." And for a brief moment, I was like, "Yeah, I am." And then it hit me. I'm drunk and I'm high right now. I've been out all night, getting high, getting drunk, and this little girl thinks that I'm awesome. And I realized that, it was only going to be a matter of time before she realized who I was, found out who I really was, and she was either going to continue to love me and become just like me, or she was going to hate me and or hate me and become like me yet, or she was going to hate me, become like me, and marry someone just like me. And that was the switch for me of, oh crap, something's got to be done. This is not okay. I don't think I cared about my life at that point, but the thought that my baby girl could grow up and marry me, you know, was too much for me. And that didn't make me quit. I think I probably drank for another couple months and then checked back into rehab for the second time.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a powerful story. Because I think there's a lot of parents too who you get in that spot, right? Where it's that yo-yoing effect, maybe in a sense, where it's like you want nothing more to quit. You want nothing more than to be this example, but also this addiction is just taking on a life of its own. And then you have that conversation to where your daughter says that like you're the greatest ever, but then I think we know, or you knew deep inside, that eventually that perception could change, and that was a scary spot to be in, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, and then too, like finding somebody that was living that way down the road was scary in itself too for her, right? And then your other children that are younger too, right? I mean, that's coming down the line of 4,
Hmm.
when, I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and I'm with you, man. The questions, the observations, and the intelligence of of them every day blows me away. They don't always know how to articulate what they're thinking and feeling, but you can
Hmm.
read it. You can read it, and they know exactly what's going on. So a couple months later, you decide to try out rehab again. How does that look for you?
Well, I remember I came into, I'm getting confused about which rehab was what. Pretty sure that had came into Sony, and you had these little passes that you could get in for any time for writing and such. And one of the song pluggers found me on one of the couches in one of the main areas in Sony. And they said, have you been home? And I was like, when? And they were like, pretty sure those are the same clothes that I saw you in a couple nights ago performing. And I was like, yeah, I haven't been home since then. And she was like, you sure you don't want to go back to rehab again? And I was like, I mean, maybe I should. And I volunteered to go that time, but I remember there was one in particular counselor at the rehab that specialized in relapse. And her name was Regina. And I absolutely adored her. Older lady, and she just had a way with words and how she'd pull things out of you. And I knew that there was something deeper that we weren't getting to. It wasn't a surface level thing. And so I said, I'll go back, but only if I have Regina. And so they set it up. Sony took care of it and set me up with Regina. And man, the lady just pulled so many things out of me. Like I remember sitting in class one day or in group, and there was a pastor in there, a pastor of a very large church in Nashville was in there with us. And she put him standing in a chair. And she was like, is this what it feels like to you when you're preaching? over your congregation, all these people sitting lower than you and you standing up here. And he was like, yeah. And she was like, and do you feel pressure? And he was like, yeah, you feel pressure to be better than everybody else. And it sucks and it's hard. And, you're not allowed to fail. Like they don't want to treat you as a human being, because you're supposedly better than them. And he's like, if you do fail, then you lose your job. And he was like, so you can't admit any of your faults. And he's like going through this whole thing. And Regina's watching me get agitated the entire time that he's talking. And she gets him like really hype. And then she goes, Jared, what are you feeling right now? And I just blurt out, get off the freaking chair, dude. If you don't want to be on the chair, if you don't want people to look at you, then stop climbing up on places where people are going to look at you. Just go sit with everybody else. And she immediately pulls away from him and goes, so do you think that you might be doing that at all when you step on that stage? And you're just like, oh, geez, and she just had a way of pulling things out of you and getting to issues. And she had me really wrapped up in a conversation one day, and I can't even remember what it was about. And in the middle of it, totally out of left field, she said, do you love your wife? And I said, no. And she was like, huh, did you know that about yourself? And I was like, no. And she started challenging, like what it was, what my relationship was like. And it became very obvious to me, like, oh, a huge portion that I'm struggling with staying sober is this very toxic relationship that I'm in. And I wouldn't leave it because I didn't want to leave my children. And so my therapy took a different turn and into like, hey, you're destroying your children by staying in a relationship that's keeping you unhealthy. You're going to have to leave. You're going to have to put your sobriety first in order to become the dad that you need to be to those kids. And, because they were watching me and they knew that I drank a lot and they were little, so they didn't know how to process anything, but they knew that, daddy yelled at mom a lot and daddy punched walls and daddy threw fits and the cops showed up a lot. And, so they were observing those things. And so when I left rehab that time, I decided to not go home. I went to live with a friend who was actually one of my drinking buddies. And my therapist felt like I would be safer with one of my drinking buddies than I would going back home to a toxic environment. And I went 12 years without a drink after that, or a drug.
Wow. And what helped you for those 12 years?
It was the friends, it was the people that I put myself around. It was finding a higher power. Definitely a lot of meetings for the first, probably 4 years. I backed off after that. I think it went on autopilot after that. Became the man that I wanted to be. And watched my relationship with my children grow. And the more they praised me for the father that I was being, the more you wanted to be a better father. Met a wonderful woman, got married to her, and built a life that, I just didn't want to let go of. And so I found it really easy to be sober when you were building a life that you wanted and you had so much to lose. During that time period, I went on the first season of The Voice, and that's where sobriety changed drastically for me because they put it front center. They announced me, I believe on the first night out, they announced me as a recovering alcoholic addict, father of 6, because, they want that topic that makes everybody talk and makes everybody look. At that time, my new wife had 2 kids, so now I have 6 children, and I've been clean for 8 or 9 years at that point. And my social media went nuts with people. I want to know how I got clean, how their father gets clean, how do they help their brother, their mother, their sister, their cousin. And most people don't know this, but it was Twitter that was mainly going nuts for me. And on the sidebar of your phone on Twitter, there's a little dot. And that dot means you have messages waiting. But if you have enough messages, that dot turns into a line. So there's this line that stays there. And I was getting so many messages about sobriety that I could scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, and you'd never get up to the top of the messages. And so I found myself answering messages back to people about 2 hours per day. I would put aside and just answer messages about sobriety. And you just felt like you were up against something that you were never going to fix. And most of these people, they're asking for help, but they didn't really want the help. They want the quick fix. and you felt like that you were just wasting time. And so we started looking at, well, how, if you can't fix people, then maybe you can, stop people from going there. So we started going into schools and playing some songs and talking to kids about drugs and alcohol addiction, but from a very different perspective. Instead of, all the negative and all the bad things that were going to happen to you, we took a positive approach of like, let's focus on something positive. Maybe we'll get a positive reaction to it. And so we looked at it and went, what do you want? What do you want out of life? Who do you want to be? What do you want your life to look like? Who has a life that looks like what you want? How did they do it? How did they get there? What do they do? What are their practices? So whether you wanted to be a baseball player or whether you wanted to be, an influencer on social media or whether you wanted to be a doctor, looking at the people who had accomplished the goals that you wanted and looking at how they did it, and then looking at, do they actually have the life that you want? Are they happy? Are they at peace? And thinking from a perspective of, when you're motivated for what you want out of life and what you want to do, you don't really have time for alcohol and drugs. If you're really going to stay focused on what you want out of life and realize, like, I think it's when you don't know who you are and you don't know what you want that you start getting lost. And you see people that are moving from specifically like high school into college. That's a big spot where you don't know where you are, where you see alcohol and drugs rise. You see people coming out of college and not necessarily knowing what job they're going to. Any sort of transition in your life is where we typically see a big spike in alcohol and drugs. So we ran that program in over 300 schools over the next few years. We tacked it on to every tour that we did. We latched on to another couple schools. And that turned into realizing that it was the same thing for veterans when they were leaving the military. There was that uncertainty of who they were, and alcohol and drug spike. It was people leaving prison. It was just the fact that you have this identity as an alcoholic, and now you've got to create this whole new identity. Well, you have the same thing in high school or being a veteran or being in the NFL or being, anytime you're leaving something, you don't know who you are without that thing. And so that was the way that we started motivating and talking to people through that. And I think I found myself in the same position as that pastor years ago, where all of a sudden all the eyes were on you and you felt like you always had to be on your best behavior and you had to say the right things. And I felt that pressure getting to me. And I felt like I was having to be something that I wasn't necessarily, because it's not like you got it all figured out. Like, you're trying to help people, but you don't know everything there is about sobriety, but people are treating you that way. And it felt like a lot of pressure. And I got in a fight with my wife one night, and she said, "You need to go find who you are." And I said, "Okay." And I was 12 years sober at the time. And I went to a bar and I got drunk and I came home and she said, "You're drunk." And I said, "Yeah, I went to find who I am. And apparently I'm still a drunk." And I just started everything over again. I wouldn't say that I went right back to where I was, because I now had this program. And so it went to a hiding. I tried to drink as little as possible in as few locations, and I tried to hide it as much as possible, because now I have all these people looking to me for sobriety questions, and I'm no longer sober.
Man, that sounds exhausting, Jared.
Yeah, it was.
Trying to hide out. And I mean, I'm with you too. And I wanted to touch back too on when you left that treatment center the first time. And these are my thoughts on it. Is I think a lot of the times when I tried to quit everything, my focus was on the thing, whether it be alcohol, drugs. And I think what you got from that therapy session and the person you worked with there is that, hey, let's look at the bigger picture here and try to improve or try to make changes in other areas of your life so that you can have a chance to feel good about where you're headed. And then, maybe with plugging into the program and stuff, we could get some headway on the drinking, because I see a lot of people come into all this and it's all about the drinking, right? People's question is, how do I stop drinking? And it's like, hey, that's a great question. I mean, that's a really good question, but honestly, I can answer it in like really 3 words, don't, or 2 words, don't drink. Like, there you go. That's your solution. What I think the bigger question is to the whole process is, how do you stay sober and start to rebuild a life that you can be proud of And for me anyway, I had a little bit of cleaning up to do from what was. Everything, just because I decided to get sober, everybody wasn't just, cheering from the rooftops like, hey, this is great. I had to go back and look at some of the disastrous stuff that I left behind. And I think maybe just hearing that part of your story, it's like, hey, you started to look at people, places, and things around you that also would have to make changes. But it really hits home, man, especially what I do and try to help people. And I mean, I think my idea of this is every day I learn that I know less and less about this whole thing. I know absolutely nothing for this. And the reason being is because people have so many different experiences throughout their life, and they have so many different journeys, and the circumstances are so different for everybody. Like, I don't know if I've come across one person with the exact same story. A lot of our stories are similar, but it's really hard to just give this, blanket direction or blanket advice to people without understanding what they've got. But and that's the thing too, is I think we both know this all too well, that it's like a process to get sober. It's like you've got to maybe go through some stuff, and you've got to experience some stuff, and you've got to maybe hit a wall or two, and you've got to hit, you've got to hit something. Like, I don't think it's required that you hit a bottom, but you've got to go through some pain to be able to work up the courage and, be interested in like going after this thing, because it's going to be painful as well. Beautiful, but it's going to be tough as well. So what was the experience like on The Voice? That was really interesting to me. Did they mention to you that like, hey, this is what your tag or intro is going to be? Or
No, not at all. And once it had been said, my team went nuts because we were like, well, this isn't what we want to be branded as. This is not what we want to talk about. And I think that's probably where the birth of our charity came from, and going into schools, is because now you were branded that way. You had to figure out a way to utilize this correctly then, because the music industry, sponsor wise, is ran by alcohol. And no alcohol sponsor wants to sponsor a guy that's recovering addict alcoholic. And so it it was a weird spot. And the voice was incredible. Like I said, I credit it to giving me the career I had today, as well as giving me the platform to help other people. Had they not announced that day, then I would have never known what I really feel like I was intended to do. Because the times that I feel the happiest in my career, or the happiest just in general outside of my family, are when I'm out talking to kids, or a veteran, or a prisoner, someone about alcohol. And in this career, because you're in the public view so often, there's never a performance that you don't wind up talking to someone about it afterwards. Everyone assumes that you're drinking, even though multiple times during the show I'll play a particular song and discuss, my issues. They're often drunk and not necessarily listening to what you're saying. They just hear the song, and they'll come up to you afterwards and ask you what's in your cup. And when you say water, they always look at you very puzzled. And if they're in the right headspace, the next question is always, why? You know, you say water and they go, why? And oh, I'm a recovering alcoholic. In fact, the other night I come on stage and this guy said, why? And I said, I'm a recovering alcoholic. He goes, oh, he's like, I had a problem for a while. I went to rehab and stuff. He's like, but I got a handle on it now. And I was like, dude, you are double fisting currently. And he was like, yeah, but that's just because they said they were going to shut the bar down. I won't be able to get a drink later. And I was like, still, like, you don't see the issue here. Like, you're still preparing to drink later. Like, anyway, it's constant that people want to tell you, I got to balance on this. And, I think that's our opportunity in that point, to not point out what they're doing necessarily, but just love on them, joke with them, and, try to say those things that might make them think a little bit about, like, oh, maybe I don't. And so typically when it comes up, they want to know, why did you stop drinking? Why did you feel like you needed to? I typically go for things that are pretty undeniable to someone who drinks a lot, which is, I was hurting my family. The reality is that I started thinking about all the time, effort, and money being spent on alcohol, and realized all the time that it was taken away from my family. All the things that I could be doing with them different, like going on a hike or playing games with them. I started looking at, and this is the reason I quit this last go around. Started back drinking and did that for 5 years. And when I decided to stop, it was August of 2023. And I just played a show where I messed up 9 out of 18 songs. I screwed up. And I even stood on stage at some point, just not singing and just looking at the people and thinking, I wonder if they know I'm supposed to be singing right now. And then I thought, well, they came to hear me sing, so there's a likely chance that they think I'm supposed to be singing. And then I just walked off stage. And that registered with me the next morning of, oh, you've let this demon back in. This thing has control of you again. And it became that fear of realizing that that bottle, that drink had come after me before. It had taken my life before. It had taken my children before. It had taken my career before. And it was coming after me again. And so I could either let it destroy me or I could get off the train quicker this time. And so I quit the next day. And it's been a completely different experience this go around because it didn't feel like you had to. Now all of a sudden, it's a realization of I stopped because I want to improve my life. My ass wasn't on fire. I wasn't going to jail. I wasn't losing my house. I just wanted a better quality of life. I wanted to be, I'm 45 now. And I think, life is half over. And you've never really gotten to see what you're actually capable of. And I just wanted to know that the rest of my life that I spent being the best husband, father, man, brother, friend that I could possibly be, to know that I had achieved the best that I was capable of being and doing.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, because you mentioned, I think before we jumped on the show here, that it was like more like the back problems before. Right?
Yeah.
This person was on your back, that person was on your back. And yeah, I think the game completely changes when it's our own decision. And I think that, I think that like for a lot of people, I think that's the hardest thing to come to. That decision, right? We want to hang on the fence. We want to go out on Friday nights and we don't want to have any disastrous stuff happens, but it usually does happen. But then we're like, oh, it only happens once a month. So I mean, I can handle that. And then the lines get blurred, right? And then we're in this state, some of us for years, of this undecision, like not making a decision, undecided about what do we want for our life? Like even when you mentioned back to about sharing at the schools, like where do you want to be in life? What's your vision for things? Does this fit into it or does it not? And I think all that stuff you mentioned there is incredible motivation. And you got to that point, it sounds like at the end, if any of this stuff is going to be possible for my life, being the father I want to be, being that husband, being the brother, just being a good person out there, that in my career to take my career maybe to the next level, that this is probably going to have to be part of it.
Well, yeah. And the insanity of realizing, like, why am I trying so hard to figure out how to control alcohol? Why am I trying so hard? Like when you know that this thing has the ability to take away everything that you love the most, when you know this thing has the ability to put you in prison and should have the things that you've done, the amount of times that you've driven drunk, the amount of times that you could have killed somebody, like all the things that that every one of us know. And yet you're going, let me play with this a little bit. Let me see if I can figure why the hell are you trying so hard to fit alcohol in your life and still accomplish and still have a life? Why the hell would you stop? Just stop. And if you don't want to stop, then you've just proven you're a freaking alcoholic, because
Yeah.
a normal person that didn't have a problem would go, hey, this is causing issues. I'm going to stop doing this. Just stop, like.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's progressive over time. I think for most people that I've talked to anyway, it's progressive. So what it looks like today is not what it's going to look like a year from now. And that's what I think is like, we look back even at the beginning of your story, like you enjoyed it from the beginning, but it also served a purpose and it wasn't terribly bad to begin with. And then over time, as we go through your story, I mean, you just look at how things progress and like everybody shares that story about how things just gradually have a bigger impact on our lives.
Yeah. And what's incredible though is that I also find that today, some days I still struggle with feeling like I can talk in front of people or be accepted. And I think we all go through that. I don't think there's any addict out there that doesn't relate to that to a degree of not feeling worthy or not feeling enough, not fitting in, and having trouble communicating with others. Like this, we're always pretty good at. But stepping into a room of people, I, I either, I'm very one sided of the, I either feel like I'm the shit or I feel like I'm nothing. And I don't know what it's going to be when I walk into that room. But, and alcohol definitely helps you feel better walking into that scenario. But what I find these days, when I'm not feeling good about myself walking into a room, I probably haven't shared with anybody. I probably haven't been trying to be a service to other people that day or that week or maybe even that month. If I'm constantly sharing with others and trying to help people, I feel good about me. It's pretty hard to feel bad about yourself when you're consistently trying to help other people, when you're doing good things. If you, once again, like what we talked about before, giving you something to live for, when you are being a great father, when you're being a great husband, when you sacrifice for others to make other people's lives better, it's hard for me to feel bad about myself on those days, you know? And so I think that's part of what's different now as well is understanding like the AA thing of like, you got to give it away to keep it. Very true in my life, at least. If I'm not trying to help the next alcoholic or addict, then I start losing my sobriety. Doesn't mean that I drank over it, but my sobriety is much, much more than drinking or not drinking these days. You know, my sobriety is my connection with my higher power, which I choose to call God. Having that spiritual connection, that spiritual awakening. If I'm connected to my higher power, I don't have to worry about how I treat people. I just treat people better. If I'm connected to my higher power, I naturally love people. I naturally forgive people. I naturally have mercy and grace. But I have to put the same amount of work that I did in the drinking. I have to put that same amount of work into my spiritual program as well.
Yeah. And that's an incredible point too, is about the work and the effort. Is you got to put in that, you got to put the effort into all these different categories. And then, I mean, giving it away. I love that too. And I mean, I think the thing you shared about walking into the room, like I'm the same way. Some days I'm on and some days I'm not. And I think that's maybe one of the beautiful things about this whole sobriety journey is that we go with the ebbs and flows, and we realize too that it's normal to not be on all the time and to not be feeling it all the time. And, it's like just going into those uncomfortable situations despite how we feel about it. As somebody listening, Jared, as we wrap things up here, I wanted to hear your thoughts too on Orange Keychain. And then I'm just wondering some advice or direction you had for anybody who is struggling.
Orange Keychain was written by Jeffrey Steele. Normally I write everything I cut, but Jeffrey Steele is, I think he's been sober about 9 years now, but he's a hit songwriter here in Nashville. He's written like over 40 number one hits. And I was writing with him one day and he said, "Hey, I want you to hear this song." And I listened to it and I was like, how come no one's cut that song? And because, everybody cuts all of his songs, pretty much. And the song really to me spoke, it sounded like an Eric Church sort of song. And I was like, why is Eric Church not into this one? And he said, I sent it to him. He put it on hold. He's like, the song's been put on hold a lot. He was like, but the second chorus of the song says, people find Jesus in the damnedest ways. And one of those ways it mentions was on a bathroom floor with a razor blade. And he said, every record label says that razor blade line is too much and they want me to change it. And I keep saying, this is my own personal story. So no, I'm not changing that line for you. And so the story behind it was he said that he was looking for an AA meeting in Florida. His son had recently passed away and he had been sober for about a year. And he said, I was just at that moment where I was just yelling at God and cursing God and basically yelling and going, hey, if you are real, I need you to show me something now. You have to show me something. I'm not doing this crap anymore. He was like, I lost my kid and I'm sober and life sucks and can't find this damn AA meeting. And he's like, and I was pulled over the side of the road and a guy pulled up beside me on a bicycle, tapped on my window. He said, I rolled down my window and I told him I didn't have any money. And he went away and comes back a little later, taps on the window, and I get a little more aggressive about it this time and said, I told you I don't have any money. The guy goes away. So the next time the guy comes up and he's pointing at something, and I roll down my window and I'm pissed off now. And I was like, dude, I told you I don't have any money. Get out of here. He's like, and the guy leaves. And he was like, and I'm still yelling at God in my car about, hey, I need you to show me a sign that only I would understand. Give me something specifically me. And he said, I looked in the rearview mirror, and as the guy was pulling away, I realized that the guy was on this very like Pee Wee Herman sort of bike, really tricked out old bike. And he said, most people don't know, but I have this huge collection of bicycles. He's like, I'm obsessed with bikes. And I was like, man, that was a really cool bike that guy was on. And he was like, and I thought, he's like, I realized the guy was pointing ahead of me. And I looked up, and the AA meeting I was looking for was right in front of me. And he was like, and so I immediately jumped out of the car. And when I jumped out, the guy was gone. And he was like, I don't know what that means to anyone else. And he was like, and you could look at coincidence or whatever. He was like, but that was God speaking to me that day. And he said, and I never looked back and I never questioned God again. He was like, I marched into that meeting and I've been sober ever since. And I wrote this song. And so I decided that I wanted to cut it and thought it was going to be a big deal, but also understood that the lines were pretty rough and it wasn't necessarily a quote unquote good radio song. But I believed in it, put the song out, and just like they said, the song tanked. Radio didn't want to play it. And the song was dead in the water for about 3 months, and I hadn't thought about it. And my wife comes downstairs one day and says, hey, how come you didn't tell me about Orange Keychain? And I said, what are you talking about? And she goes, what do you mean, what am I talking about? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What's happening? And she said, it's been number one on the video charts for 3 weeks. And I was like, what? And so I look it up, and sure enough, it was number one on the country music video charts. And it stayed there for 5 weeks total. And for a musician, that doesn't really change much for our life. Being number one video definitely doesn't make you any more money or anything. But it was interesting to me because, people don't really put out music videos much anymore. You don't really think about it. It's not a necessity like it used to be. And I dropped about $5,000 on that video, and just because I thought I was supposed to. And then to see how the song had been effective and reached a whole new group of people also made me realize in that moment that I can concoct all sorts of ways that I think God is trying to use me. But the reality is I don't know what he's using, how he's using, or when he's using it. And so these days, whatever I do, I just wake up and go, this is what I feel like God's wanting me to do. This is where I feel like God's wanting me to help. And I do that realizing that I don't necessarily have to affect the masses. I may just be affecting one person that day. But if you affect one person, what an amazing gift. What an amazing ability. Like you with your podcast. You seem to get a lot of views and a lot of people watching things at the same time. I'm sure some videos you put out, you're like, man, I thought that was going to hit, and that didn't do hardly anything, and different clips that you put out. We all get sucked into how many likes did I get? How many streams did I get? And you forget that when you're on a platform like this and you're helping others, you have no idea who God is putting you in front of that day. I had a pastor once tell me, he said, everyone talks about how great Billy Graham was, but no one talks about the guy that introduced Billy Graham to Jesus. And I was like, wow, you never know who you're affecting and how much that person's going to mean to society and what they're going to do. And so with that song, it also registered with me because I think drug addicts and alcoholics are like that way. I think churches on the whole tend to push a lot of us away. There's a lot of people that come at us with a very holier than thou attitude. And, I don't prescribe to that way of thinking. I think that the Bible is very specific about Jesus walking with the sinners and loving them and showing them a new life. So whether you believe in Jesus or not, if you look at the teachings of Jesus, they were pretty dope. They're pretty spot on the way that we should treat people. And so that's where that song was, just being able to put Jeff's testimony out there as well as to let people know, like, hey, there's all sorts of ways that we find God. There's all sorts of ways that we find our peace and move on with life.
Yeah, beautiful, man. I always love hearing the stories too. The music, you hear music sometimes, maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and it hits, and then you're just like, man, what's the story behind this, you know? And I'm anyway able to connect so much more with the music, with the story behind it when you understand a little bit more of what it's all about. So thanks for sharing that. And Jared, before we sign off here, if somebody's struggling and they're listening to this episode and they've made it here to the end, I mean, what would you mention to them to help them out?
For me, I think that the big change in every time that I stopped drinking was just the fact that I didn't want the life that I currently had. The reason that you're drinking, the reason that you're using is because you want an escape from the life that you currently have. Drugs and alcohol only make us feel like we've escaped. You can't escape. You can create a whole nother life. You don't have to be with the person you're with. You don't have to be in the job that you're in. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but you can't accomplish it at all while you're still high.
Yeah.
When you're struggling with not being happy in your position in life, you can't put a stumbling block in your way. You have to surround yourself with people that are motivated and moving in the direction you want to move. And you got to work hard. But the biggest and easiest way for me to not drink was to be dedicated to creating a better life for myself. And once again, I think that once you start doing it, you can't not talk about it. It's just impossible. This interview is the first time that I've been in public talking about this since I quit drinking again. And I think it took me this long because I had to feel like that it was going to stick before I went public with this again. And I do feel like that it will stick this time. I don't think I would have ever told you before that I didn't think I'd ever drink again. Where I'm at now, I feel like that I probably will never drink again because I like the life that I get to create without alcohol far better than the one that I create with alcohol. And so once again, if you're struggling with it, remember that you're struggling because you don't like the position you're in or you don't like who you are. And you're never going to be able to get better while you're using a crutch. Because that's all it is. Alcohol, drugs is a crutch. It's a Band-Aid, and it falls off, it wears out. But that human being that you become, the good parts of what you like about yourself when you get drunk or you get high, that is inside you. That freedom that we feel walking into a room of people after I've had a few shots, that human being is inside me. And all I have to do is figure out what unleashes that, what gives me that confidence. And for me, helping others is what gives me that confidence. If I've just helped someone and I walk in a room, dude, I'm going to feel like I'm the biggest thing in that room because
Yeah.
you know what you're doing. And you know that 99% of those people standing in that room, they didn't just affect someone's life. They didn't just help someone. They didn't just change an old lady's tire. They didn't just give someone advice about anything. Like, they just showed up. And so when I measure that, when you feel good about who you are, it no longer matters how much success someone else has had. It doesn't matter how much money they have. It doesn't matter anything. Because I wake up every day knowing that my wife and my children think that I'm the greatest thing ever. And no one can take that away from me.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And the whole thing too, I mean, I'm hearing from there is a purpose, right? When we get into sobriety, it gives us that purpose that maybe we've been searching for the whole
Yeah.
time, and we've been searching for it, a lot of the wrong places. And then when we get that purpose, it changes the game. Thank you, Jared, so much, man, for jumping on here and sharing with us.
Dude, thanks for having me.
Well, there it is, everyone. Another incredible episode here on the podcast. Thank you, Jared, so much. I'll drop Jared's Instagram handle down in the show notes below. If you have not left a review yet for the podcast, jump over to Apple or Spotify and do that. It would be incredible. Thank you, everybody, for all the kind messages, as always. And I'll see you on the next one.